Here's the thing, and this is something I've been struggling with in kind of not quite personal life, but at work, is having things used in stressful situations. Things that happen in stressful situations used against me.
That's bad management.
It is.
It's bad management.
Yeah, that's when it starts to feel like, okay, now you're just picking on me because you can't give me a problem with anything I do in my regular work. You have to go for the extreme situations. But it's
well,
like,
and also that's bullying, right? Push it till you
yeah,
snap and then hold against you what happens to you when you snap. I mean, that's not a gendered thing. That's done
no.
to everybody, but it's true. That needs to start being called what it is. That is a failure of management. Truly
Mm-hmm.
professional environments recognize that people are human and have feelings. And when you push them too hard, things are going to happen you don't want. What's the logical thing to not do? Recognize you can't push people that hard. Problem solved.
Yeah. When you push me to an adrenaline response and then try to accuse me of behaving unprofessionally, yes, I was unprofessional in that moment.
No,
But
no,
what
you
do you
weren't.
call pushing me to an adrenaline response?
That's the unprofessional part.
Mm-hmm.
If that's a colleague doing it to you, people are human. See, this could solve a lot of these diversity, inclusion, and equity issues. This one thing. If you see somebody getting upset, slow down. Actually train people how to fight fair. I'm a big fan of this now because shit happens
Oh yeah.
between people. It's so unhealthy for people to walk around bottled up because they're afraid if they have a human reaction to things, they're gonna lose everything. That nobody can do that. And the thing is, you look at these executives like Elon Musk, right? He behaves so badly.
And really quick, I just want to say, I know you know this, but for people listening, I'm not being hypothetical about being
No,
pushed to adrenaline
no,
responses.
no.
This is stuff that has been actively happening at work for me.
Yeah. Like, and it's stuff that you told them bothers you
Mm-hmm.
is the thing. And I really think it's one thing to go, oh, sorry, forgot. But that solves all of these diversity, inclusion, and equity issues. You don't have to have new policies every 6 months. You don't need to send people for specific training. You have to normalize proper communication between people, actually meaningful communication. And that does sometimes involve conflict, and nobody likes conflict, but it can sometimes be really productive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the things that I'm most grateful for, even though it caused me problems in the short term, was that whole girly nice game never took on me. And I have no idea why. I wish I could get like an autism or ADHD diagnosis or something like that to explain why it didn't take. I have no explanation. It just didn't. I don't know if it was because of this particular mentorship that I had, the fact that I was pushed academically, and so I got trained different. I don't know. It's just never taken. And I even though it's caused me, a lot of emotional pain, I think I'm in a better spot now because of it, if that makes any sense.
Oh, totally.
Like I just was never terribly invested, and I had to go the other way and recognize that no, in order for you to get anything done, people need to like you. But what I find is people like me better when I just, you know, when I'm just me, because that's all I'm good at being.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't something we don't teach boys this in certain realms, but we don't teach girls this anywhere. It's never okay to just be you. You've
And
got to improve something all the time. And I can't stand it.
and I think it's so interesting because like we've been talking today, it's like, okay, it, you and I are similar in that we both seem to be better at talking to guys. than to other girls. And there's a lot of things we don't understand. I might understand some of the female game better than you, but like I
I
was
mean,
bullied by girls, so
yeah,
it put me off that space for a long
I
time.
I
Yet
can
we
talk to women. I just
yeah,
don't understand. It's a Sherlock Holmes thing. I
yeah,
I have to cognitively remind myself of the typical female thought process.
despite all these similarities we have in that, it's like we still ended up in the tomboy and girly girl roles.
Right.
And it's like I personally I think that's fascinating.
Well, I do think there are innate elements to personality.
Oh, absolutely.
And we treat some as better and some as worse. And I don't believe that's true. I believe that you have to figure out who you are and play to those strengths instead of constantly trying to twist yourself into pretzels to appease the mob.
And I think I think this I have mentioned, I say this very carefully. This is part of why I am hesitant when it comes to non-binary pronouns,
Right.
is because I think a lot of it, especially in teenagers, young teenagers especially, is I think they look at themselves and think, oh, well, I don't entirely fit into this. I don't entirely fit into that. So I must be something else. And it's just, no, this is your individual experience in this. And obviously that comes back down to I worry that it perpetuates stereotypes of there's only one way to be a man or there's only one way to be a woman. So if you don't fit either one, you must be something in between instead of embracing that there is a spectrum
Yeah.
to the two.
I I I
It's not completely binary.
I yeah,
It is.
I do think that that concern gets shut down as transphobia, and
Yeah, and
I don't
that's why
agree.
I say it hesitantly. And I'm not saying that no one is non-binary. I'm just saying that especially if you're coming to it at that age when you're still trying to figure out who you are, I I think there's better ways to go about it.
See, I remember when I was first taught proper grammar is default to the masculine third person pronoun.
Mm-hmm.
So he. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know that it's a he. Yes, but that's proper. Why? That doesn't make any sense. I don't know it's a he. You're telling me I can be anything I want, even though I'm a girl, and now you're telling me the world defaults male in language. What is this bullshit? So I have a selfish reason for welcoming non-binary pronouns because that was what I naturally used as a kid, and I was invalidated for it. And
Yeah.
probably in another world, I would I identify as non-binary? I don't know. There's a very good chance. It's just such a pain in the ass, and I don't want to have that fight. And
Mm-hmm.
I do think that the issue is not settled.
Oh yeah.
And I do think there is more work to do separating the utter misery of gendered existences from the reality of the fact that I think a lot of people don't neatly fit into one or the other, because there's men and women, and what we observe there are differences in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
We
Oh
see
yeah.
them. There's differences, and you know, then there's the reality of people like me who, what does it mean that I'm not that?
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean that I'm atypical? Because 25% of the population is not sex typical. And so, this is where the philosophy element comes in. Do we make the categories more inclusive? Do we create new categories because the expectations the gendered expectations are going to be there no matter what we do? I say we do both. We have
Mm-hmm.
we have a reasonable opening up of the categories, recognizing that it's really weird that humans sort each other into distinct things on this body part, but no other body parts. Granted, I also have a hair color that people assume temperament things about. It's funny because the blondes are dumb thing has sort of, there's been pushback on that, but none of the other things. Brunettes are supposed to be the smart ones. Redheads have all this baggage. And it's just, all right, it's irritating. And well, so dye your hair. Well, and that's the thing, because I got all these freckles, I'm not going to be able to pull off any other look. It's just going to look weird. Ginger till I die. But it's the whole thing, just people are reacting emotionally, and I completely understand why. But the reality is that that's why activism is supposed to be advocating for better, instead of getting down in the muck in these disputes. And activism right now is doing the opposite. They're a big source of these disputes. And that's failing vulnerable people of all of these, relevant identity groups. It's failing cisgender men, it's failing cisgender women, it's failing trans men and women, it's failing non-binary people. We just keep fucking this up. And I do think, I always go back, no matter how much I wander down these rabbit holes, I do keep going back to the reality that the ultimate goal of equality efforts is advocating for people to be treated as individuals and broadening our understanding of what a healthy response is, for one, not weighting it too much in favor of masculine typicality or feminine typicality, but also just recognizing that our communications, the words we use, how we think about things, has all been informed by language. And it's okay to question that language. Like the idea that you're supposed to be an emotionless robot at work. Let's face it, that came about because of the citizen soldier in the world wars. That is if you read anything older than that, and even stuff that was inspired by the classics like The Lord of the Rings, people are crying all over themselves, like ugly crying. That's why I love Emma Thompson's take on Austen, because she understands the importance of that break in the wall, the break in the mask, because that's what all of Austen's writing was. You said it's difficult to adapt because of that.
Austen's work is so internal.
Yeah.
And it's internal, and it's on paper in the form of letters, because it's like the best part of any Austen story is when the characters either finally have a moment of self-realization, or they get a letter that explains everything that's been happening,
because they couldn't say it to their face.
And it's like, even in Les Miserables, there's a chapter where it's fairly early on, but Javert, the policeman, tells Jean Valjean, who's in disguise, okay, I thought you were this escaped criminal Jean Valjean, but they've just captured someone else who is Jean Valjean. So sorry about that. I'm headed to the trial now. And Jean Valjean spends the entire night going back and forth, pacing his room, going, this man looks like me. If I just stay here, I'm safe.
Right.
If I don't do anything, I'm safe. I can stay here. And it's this total crisis of the soul. Where he's like, do I give myself up and risk everything I've built here
Hmm.
or do I do the right thing? And in the night as he's wrestling with this, his hair goes pure white,
Yeah.
just overnight. And it's interesting because Victor Hugo didn't shy away from the fact that yes, Jean Valjean did the right thing, but everything he was afraid would happen
Hmm.
did,
Yep.
because the town that he had built up and brought from poverty and
Hmm.
saved and completely rebuilt the economy, it died
Yep.
within years without him.
Yep.
And so all these people were forced back into complete poverty. And so it's like, either way, it was a lose lose. And so he spent the rest of his life on the run, pretty much, and eventually died in squalor and
Yeah,
was
that's not in
buried
the
in a
musical,
pauper's
guys.
grave.
It's
No.
a really thick book. But I mean,
Oh,
Victor Hugo was making a lot of criticisms about the social order and about how, you know, all the upheaval that was going on really wasn't doing much to truly change the status quo. It was just who was in power.
yeah. And
And
it's interesting because like the rebellion that's depicted in Les Miserables is called the
yeah,
Students' Rebellion,
yes,
because it wasn't the actual common folk
no,
rising up.
no,
It was the wealthy students.
that's right.
So it was basically the champagne socialists in a
Yeah,
way. We're
yeah,
like, we will fight for the poor. And you see it in the song Turning
yeah,
after the end, where it's, did you see them lying where they fell? They were
yeah,
schoolboys, never held a gun. And it's like the peasants don't care.
yeah,
They're like, whatever. And it's
yeah.
so yeah, it's and that's what makes the story of Les Miserables so miserable, is because it really, the whole, it comes down to nothing you do matters.
Well, you have a
Cosette
series
was,
of bad choices. Which ones can you live with?
yeah. And
Yeah,
it's like, in the end of the musical, you get Marius having his realization and he takes Cosette to Jean Valjean just as he's dying.
yeah.
That's not in the book.
No,
It's once she finds out he's not really her father, they grow apart. She doesn't know how to talk to him. He dies alone.
yeah.
It's
But that wasn't a good musical ending. And that's what we were talking about adaptations, right? I mean,
yes.
musicals always have to be about the human condition, whereas Les Miserables, the story, uh, is about, I mean, shit, some of the stuff that's still going on in France right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the young people, it's the university educated young people that are on, there's like welfare for working people in France. So companies don't have to pay younger employees a living wage because the government will top it up. And of course, they're creating a class warfare by doing that, by increasing the retirement age. Like it's an unsustainable system.
Yeah. And, it's kind of funny because, Victor Hugo also wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah,
That did not have a Disney ending
no.
either.
I
Esmeralda did not survive, and neither did Quasimodo.
I mean, The Hunchback of Notre Dame to me is the darkest Disney animation.
It is, and like that even still has a happy ending.
It does, but I mean, I think that if that had been made today, the concerned parents would have flipped their shit over Esmeralda.
I mean, I still wasn't allowed to see it as a kid. I and
Oh, interesting.
I know a couple other people who weren't.
That's
Um,
very interesting.
one girl in particular, because her parents thought Frollo was a part of the church,
Okay.
and so they didn't want her to see it because they thought it was a bad depiction of someone who was part of the church. But it's that, this is a bit of a side note, but I found an interesting parallel where it's like I would ask guys, okay, what's your favorite Disney movie?
Mm-hmm.
The answer was almost always the same. It was either The Lion King or The Hunchback.
Because they're not
And
princesses.
yes, but so I said, okay, but Aladdin, despite having one of the canonical Disney princesses, that's also a
About a boy.
male, about a boy. And my best friend said, yeah, but it's a liar revealed.
It's a
And
what?
it's liar revealed. And
So?
I don't know. I just, my best friend said he hated that, and that's why he didn't enjoy that movie very much. So
Interesting. Because
not
I mean,
not so much the lie being exposed. I think it was just the fact the lie is what propels the story.
wait, they don't see that as a movie about class?
No.
That's interesting.
I mean, we haven't talked about it too much because I
Because
was just like,
to me,
I,
I think any of these guys, like Beauty and the Beast, should be their favorite. This is a joke, okay? This is a joke, guys. I said shit, but okay. She's a nerd and she's weird, and she gets to know the inner him and falls in love with him.
Mhm.
You'd think that'd be a slam dunk based on a lot of the complaints we're hearing from people.
Well, it is still female centric.
So what? Like, really, so what? I mean, we find ways to relate to movies that are male centric. I mean, people say, "What's your favorite movie?" I'm like, hands down, Rocky. And why? It every time I watch it, I see something new. Do I think I'm like Rocky? No, but I love that first freaking movie, and the Rocky 2 is amazing. They start to slide after that, but that first Rocky movie, like, that's the shit. And movies have to be about a main character, and you cannot both. And I think a lot of guys, if they felt that it was socially acceptable, they would say something like Beauty and the Beast.
Mm-hmm.
Bobby would have no problem. We love you, Bobby. The fact that he does stuff on female centered stuff, I think that's awesome, because
Yeah.
more people have to do that stuff.
And,
He loves Charmed. He also loves Power Rangers. These are not in conflict.
and like that's something else that I've said before is it's like I hate these blank characters that you're supposed to self-insert with.
You mean
And so
Bella
it's
and
like,
Twilight?
yes, she's like, even Harry doesn't have that much of a personality.
You mean Harry Potter?
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about Harry Potter, because
I just want to say I was hashtag read another book before it was popular.
yeah, I Harry Potter's superpower is popularity.
Mm-hmm.
And why is he so popular? Because he just has this inherent specialness because of what his parents did. Like, the whole thing, he is terrible to his friends. He's terrible to the girls who have crushes on him.
Mm-hmm.
He's walking misery and destruction. And by the fifth book, I was like, why are we rooting for this kid?
Okay, you know how we've talked about how there's the classic bad boy and then there's the modern bad boy that
Yeah,
is terrible and toxic?
yeah.
Harry Potter is like baby's first toxic bad boy.
Well, that's interesting.
It's like you're talking about how he's miserable and destructive, and those are a lot of what people attribute to the bad boy and what that do define the
Interesting.
toxic bad boy. And it's like I hadn't thought of it until you
That's
said
a
it, but
that's a good point.
yeah. But it's I've talked about also people are like, oh, this was a story about, it was a story for the outcasts and the kids who didn't fit in. He's a jock.
Oh, he's a popular jock. That I don't get that whole this is a story for the kids didn't fit in. How do you
He's the
figure?
quarterback.
He's the quarterback in the cool house. This isn't a book about a Hufflepuff with, a cleft palate. Apologies to anyone with a cleft palate. I just pulled something out of my ass there. It's come on. He's a conventionally attractive white boy in a Scottish boarding school. What do you mean? Like, the whole thing is about our friends are bigger than your friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, people are confusing protagonist bias for the story of an underdog. We care
Mhm.
about Harry's experiences because we're aware of them.
Oh, but the government tried to silence him in one of the books.
Well, you mean the stuff with Umbridge?
Mhm.
Okay, they were silencing everyone.
Okay,
I mean,
I just want to be clear, guys. I'm being
oh,
sarcastic
that was
as I say
obvious sarcasm.
that.
Yeah,
Okay, guys.
obvious sarcasm was obvious there. I mean, I don't
Okay.
know. We know now that J.K. Rowling is completely self-aware, which fuels into my theory that she stole all the good parts of that book.
Mhm.
So, read Charles Dickens, Terry Pratchett, and Mervyn Peake, and you'll get anything that's good out of Harry Potter.
Mhm.
Those were the combos, with the side of a few other things. But there is an example of there is there are fewer things I can think of that are so thoroughly status quo with Harry Potter. Like Harry Potter is to the underdog what Buffy is to feminism. It just ain't.
Yeah.
It's the acceptable, well, ish, you know. He's not totally ideal, and therefore he's an underdog. Like, what? All right. I don't know.
It's that here's my character that has a couple flaws. So it can't be a Mary Sue because it's not perfect.
Yeah, why doesn't Harry Potter get pegged for Gary Sue
Oh,
status?
oh, he does.
Does he?
Like it's much quieter, but like when I was learning about the Mary Sue and Gary Stew, that
Yeah,
was the example most people brought up. I
because
was like,
it was funny. A comment thread on Twitter, um, devolved. I don't even remember what it was originally about, and I don't care because these two guys started just laundry listing all the anime characters that are straight up Gary Stew territory, and it was fascinating. And I mean, there's an example of how, and this ties back into something I have an issue with yes, we're gonna go there, guys. You were waiting for it. I've been very good so far because I don't like talking about this particular group.
mhm.
But the idea of a trope being inherently bad or against a particular group of people is something that drives me nuts.
Oh boy.
It shows a fundamental misunderstanding not only of the tropes that were used in Tropes versus Women. And okay, don't get me wrong, I supported the making of Tropes versus Women. I did not know it was going to become the academic standard for inclusion of women in media. It was never about that. It was one person's opinion, for fuck's sake.
Things like tropes versus women are supposed to be conversation starters. They are not
Right.
supposed to be the be all end all.
Yes, and it's not Arnita Sarkeesian's fault that people couldn't keep it in its proper place. Like that
I
never
don't think
should have.
she helped.
Well, I don't think she's self-aware enough to help or hurt anything. But that was very blunt and out loud, and I stand by it. But okay, let's take the very first one, the damsel in distress, and it was like, finally, it's getting good.
Okay, I want to say something
Okay,
for Beth. I love the damsel in distress. Like it is
yeah,
something
okay,
that shows up in my own writing and not like, oh, it's gonna be a twist. No, straight up damsel in distress, rescued by the love interest hero. Let's go.
see, I never liked the damsel in distress as a kid because I was never going to be it. I got into trouble. Nobody came to save me. It was just like, fuck this. This isn't real. This isn't life. But the fact is, okay, I made a web series and I'm currently making a game about a character who's a damsel in distress who does not rescue herself, who leans into what she's good at. And part of the thing she's good at is being a damsel in distress. And locking myself into that trope has made for a very interesting character. And this is the thing about tropes. They provide structure. The obsession with tropes just drives me crazy because people get afraid of them.
And that's the thing. Tropes are not okay, combine these three or four things, there's your character.
Right.
They are They are not the broth. They are not the ingredients. They are the seasoning you add to the soup.
Their structure that people immediately gets as a shorthand.
Yes.
Yeah. It doesn't define your character. Your character's role in society is significant to the story. But let's take the Princess Peach, Princess Zelda thing that Feminist Frequency did right off the top. It started the whole thing.
Can I just say something? So it's like, the biggest thing, and maybe you're going to come to this. Zelda is, and even Peach, but especially Zelda, is so important to the kingdom that without her, it falls apart.
Right.
And like that's the whole point for Ganondorf to go after Zelda, because she's the important person. That's why she's the name on the box.
Zelda one is not a damsel in distress.
Mm-mm.
She's a trickster. People miss that.
Mm-hmm.
She's a different cut. She is outwitting Ganon every single time. She's buying time for Link to show up as the courageous underdog, and they save the kingdom together. Link
And that's
can't
her
do it on her own.
That's her playing to her strengths.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't like when they take these princess characters and we're gonna put them in pants and put a sword in their hands.
Right.
Like
that's
is
not
a
the
valid
gig.
Yeah, it's like that's a valid character, that's fine, but doing that strips the value of the mental power and the political power.
I'm not going to disagree with you, because Super Princess Sparkle Muffin's costume is an old school She-Ra costume, because she was being thrifty and buying used dresses because princesses went to pants. that was the joke. I thought it was, but that's her, right? Look, she's doing something frugal. It's not in her nature, so she's so proud of herself.
And it's like, again, if you want, it's perfectly valid to have a princess character who does do that. I just don't want to see established characters now having to be updated, because that's no longer acceptable.
Well, I mean, in the boss fight game, if you look closely at Tomoe, she's wearing men's clothing.
Mm-hmm.
So we're having both, because that's the point. You can do both. You can be inclusive and involve different groups of people and have everybody have a favorite.
And that's the way to do true diversity in a story. Yeah. That's why I have such a large cast in Calidus, so I could cover a whole gamut of many different kinds of people.
Well, and I don't want everyone to have to be tough. Like, yes, the reason I like Link is he's sort of the 8-year-old boy who's like, I'm going to grow up to be strong to protect my family.
Mm-hmm.
And it's braver when you're not, giant rippling pecs like Ganon has. Like, I like that. And do I, and I say this is like, my inner voice is Kratos. So the fact that I can connect to Legend of Zelda on its merits, I don't need media that constantly directly validates me. Mm-hmm. I want interesting stories, and that's the problem with the demands. There's something the people at Feminist Frequency have issues with in tropes versus women, and in with the damsel in distress. Mm-hmm. And I suspect it's the same issue I have, is that's not me. Nobody's coming to save me. Fuck off. I don't want to think about what a failure as a woman that makes me. I'm not pretty enough to be saved, is what goes on in your brain. And that doesn't mean that stories about characters like that are invalid. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with wanting to be pretty.
It's a fantasy.
Well, and that, I think what we do is expand what pretty means.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't understand it's so bad that if you type beautiful woman into any, AI art program, you get a blonde. that looks vaguely anime because, well, we know where they're getting their data from, you know, and it's like, beautiful woman should not be that specific according to an AI. That says there's something wrong with humanity. But it, you know, that was the problem I had with Miranda and Mass Effect. The entire concept of a perfect woman should have been something they called out in Mass Effect 2, not waited until Mass Effect 3 to go back and somebody probably went, oh yeah, that's a problem, and retroactively clean that up. But the idea of the perfect woman being a brown-haired white woman, the interesting thing is it spoke to a truth about video games, because how do you get a self-respecting female protagonist? Well, skinny white cisgender girl with brown hair and a B cup. That's the only thing that's considered safe. Anything else is too much of a statement. That's how
Isn't that
norms
every
work, right?
woman in the Star Wars movies?
Well, I think that's part of the reason it came from that, because people
Mm-hmm.
saw, you know, Carrie Fisher's Princess Leia as and strong, but, you know, yeah, they don't want to admit they had thoughts about the metal bikini. And I don't like what feminism has done to that moment, because to me, the costume, one, it was a callback to Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Rosetta Art specifically.
Frazetta art of Edgar Rice Burroughs, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one. Two, you're worried about her costume when the metaphor is choking her slave master with his own chain. What the fuck is wrong with all of you people? How did you miss that point?
And here's the thing, the fact so many women cosplay that outfit.
Yeah.
I have seen more slave Leia, and I know we're supposed to call it the Hut Slayer Leia costume now.
Are we really?
Yes.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, no,
No,
I'm going to call it the slave Leia.
because that's what it was. It was a slave outfit.
Yeah. It's, you know, and it does fit into a particular fantasy. And it's not just a fantasy men have.
And,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's like, you know, in the NPR did a series of audio dramas of the trilogy, which are absolutely fantastic.
Oh, awesome.
I highly recommend them. Bit hard to come by now. But I think I can send you the files if you want to hear it. But you know, there's a scene in Return of the Jedi after they escape Tatooine and they're on the Falcon heading to the rendezvous with the rebellion. And Leia's like, okay, I think I'm gonna go change into something a little more durable. And Han's like, well, what are you gonna do with that? Are you just gonna throw it away? And she's like, we'll see.
Right. Right. But that was considered feminist at the time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this was in like the early 90s that they made
that was
the dramas.
Being allowed to be seen after the unisex androgyny of the 80s was a big part of the 90s.
Yes.
You know, and that's the thing that people have to stop with the it's feminist, it's not feminist based on strictly appearance, because feminism is about, oh god, my brain went so many places, because again, what do they do with the damsel in distress trope in Mario? Well, Peach is a really dirty Mario Kart driver, for one, but also she actually, I mean, people don't realize in Japan the most powerful person you can depict in fiction is a princess, because you can't have an emperor. It's considered, you know, it's considered disrespectful to the Emperor of Japan.
Interesting.
That is not the princess, because the emperor is in the Japanese tradition is sort of a figurehead. The only one you see, the one who does stuff, has been traditionally the princess. It's a different symbol in
And
Japan.
especially back in, and I can't remember if I've talked about this on Two Women Talking, but back in like 2017, as pop feminism became so big, and it's like we got the sequel trilogy with Star Wars, and then the first Wonder Woman movie had
Mhm.
Antiope, who was played by the same actress who played Buttercup in The Princess Bride.
Yes.
And people were talking about, oh, I love that all the princesses I watched as a child are growing up to be, and now I'm seeing them become generals. And I'm like,
Mhm.
that's a downgrade. The
Yeah.
princess who tells the general what to do.
Yeah,
Like,
that's a good point.
and they're just so, oh, basically, it's a woman in a man's position.
Right.
And I'm like, just clearly, just over your head.
Yeah.
So stupid. Oh God, it still makes me so mad. I'm
It's
just like,
also, I mean, every data point that goes against the theory that damsel in distress slash princess bad is just ignored. The fact that Princess Peach is a playable character in Super Mario 2 gets dismissed with uh oh, that it's a reskin of Doki Doki Panic. So that's information outside the work. What does it matter what the origin is? She's playable. And Super Mario 3, where she's pretty much telling him what to do through letters the whole time. She's not kidnapped in Super Mario 3. Uh, hand wave away, still not the main character. Super, like the fact she has her own games. Oh, it's only on the DS.
So
She's in Smash Brothers. It just, they
I mean, so is Sephiroth.
Well, so's a lot of characters, but it's like they get this position, this emotional position, and then they find a way to backfill with things that they're facsimiles of reason, but they're not actually reasoning from first principles. And this is where you get into the postmodernism, where for some godforsaken reason, you're not allowed to point that out. You're not allowed to say that somebody who made something based on an emotional perspective is wrong. And the interesting thing is that I was concerned enough about Anita Sarkeesian's feelings that I made Zarkazan clearly a crazy fangirl and not a parody of Anita Sarkeesian. So I'm not somebody who says feelings don't matter. I do think it's valid that to say this is an overdone trope. Can we have something else, please? The problem with this particular feminist approach is that they only want to replace one overdone trope with another totally overdone, even more boring trope. And that doesn't solve the problem. And
feelings are valid, but they have their place.
well,
I
feelings
think.
being valid doesn't mean anybody can immediately do anything about your feelings.
Exactly.
You can care, but the whole tropes versus women thing didn't change the fallacy that games featuring women don't sell. The boring stuff we got because of tropes versus women played into the idea that games with female playable characters don't sell. It's not true. From the history, I mean, Metroid games sold well. The original Tomb Raider games sold well. Oh, but she's sexualized. I dare anybody to look at that original Tomb Raider game and even truly read that combination of polygons as a true human being, never mind sexy.
I mean, it's not until you get to, like, I don't know what the box art looked like on Tomb
Well,
Raider 2.
it was still incredibly stylized. It was based on indie comics. He was based on Tank Girl, among other sources.
Interesting.
Yeah, Lara Croft was originally supposed to be Laura Cruz. She was Latina. One of the references for her was Nina Cherry. Like, there was an example of, okay, you all on their own, they decided the perfect woman was a biracial Latina. Awesome. With a British accent because it was made in Britain.
Of
It's just
course.
like they did that all on their own. Nobody needed to push them to do that. And that's what I'm talking about. When you actually leave guys alone and don't put all these conformist pressures on them, their version of the ideal woman isn't what you think.
Mm-mm.
Like I experimented with this in television. Something I'm very grateful for, as hard as it was being able to take all the stuff I learned in women's studies and apply it to the real world, and discovered none of this actually works, because the principle I started applying is assume nothing. Let's not assume that these depictions of women on television come from an actual demand in men.
Mm-hmm.
Let's change it up and see what happens. And one of the things I discovered is, yes, I was right. Guys like a variety of things, and there are some, because it was the waif era at the time, and a lot of guys liked more meat on the bones than what they were getting in media at the time.
Oh yeah.
Now, that does not mean that that is a better man than a guy who likes a slimmer frame. It just is.
There's no accounting for taste.
Well, the reality is that the tastes of men are just way more diverse than what the media depicts.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
that's
even what some men admit, because I remember skimming through a
oh yeah.
men's magazine and reading like an advice column, particularly, and this guy wrote in and he's like, "Yeah, I'm not big, I'm not buff," and the guy giving advice specifically said, "Luckily, unlike how men really only tend to like one type of woman, you know, women were fortunate like a lot of different types of guys." And that rattled me for a bit, and it wasn't until I got older that I'm like, you're such a liar.
Yeah.
And you're just perpetuating. Was this written by a woman?
Yeah. Well,
That's what I wonder. Maybe it was written by someone who was secretly a woman.
yeah, I mean, that's why I like us having discussions about the very different things that we find attractive. And I mean, it's interesting to me that I'm wording this very carefully, that we were expected for years to accept a very rigid, usually unattainable, very expensive media beauty myth.
Mm-hmm.
But now that men are on the receiving end of that, it's going to pieces territory.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a thing I think feminism is failing. Because like you said, let's not be as stupid as the people who came before us. Let's not be as cruel. Let's be more open.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not, and I mean, I do think the diversity of, okay, we don't get enough male love interest for female leads as it is. But I was really interested. Okay, we're talking about feminism, so we have to go to She-Hulk, but I was really interested in the fact that what I saw was they picked Matt Murdock precisely because he's blind.
Mm-hmm.
And Jen's biggest insecurity was her looks.
I mean, it's interesting because that's also flipping the thing. And what's his love interest? The blind sculptor.
The blind love interest trope is a thing that usually, I mean, that was Beast in X-Men, and I thought it was bullshit. Like, oh, she can see, and now she doesn't like him anymore. Well, she's not very nice. Like, that was my attitude as a kid. Like, well, you just ruined her for me. It didn't make any sense, but we were supposed to believe, oh, yes, of course, he's so deformed. Are you kidding me? He's smart and he reads poetry. Who cares if he's fuzzy? Like what? But this is the thing, that these messages are treated as facts of what men and women want. And what I find so interesting is the exact same guys that were like, that's not what we want in real life. We don't need a woman to look like Scarlett Johansson. And Scarlett Johansson doesn't look like Black Widow, usually, you know. A lot of that's a lot of post-production. But you know, they're like, no, we don't need that. That's not me. That's just media. It's not real. But when they were on the receiving end, they went to pieces. And that, as much as I accept that She-Hulk was a very painful experience for a lot of guys, this is where I think the art, the piece of media, was not the problem. It was the way the media about media talked about it that was the problem. And I recently had an experience where I was interviewed by a reporter from the Toronto Star about, you know, the Ed the Sock whole thing. And the reporter kept leading me towards the idea that the character had softened. And I don't agree.
Ed the Sock?
Yeah. I don't agree that the character is any less edgy. It's just the edges of society have changed.
Yeah, standards have changed.
Standards have changed, yeah. But this reporter kept asking the different ways. He was clearly looking for a particular quote. He was leading the interview. And so I'm sitting here right now going, I know what I said. What snippet of it is he going to print?
Yeah.
And that's what I saw with a lot of the She-Hulk coverage. Those interviews are much longer interviews. The media decides what to include in the final cut. And they can radically change the meaning of what someone said. And then there's this whole new layer of media, which is social media, where people pick that shit to death, trying to find the conspiracy. And I remember what that one is. They hate the fans. Show me evidence they say they hate the fans.
Okay, here's a point I've made before. I don't know if I've made it on here.
Yeah.
But people always push back. You have the people who are comic book fans who complain endlessly about the MCU or make comments like, oh, it's the MCU now. Or you have the young adult women who make fan art and write fan fiction and who buy tickets to go see the MCU movies. Which is the fan base you're going to cater to?
That's a good point. They're obviously, well, they know who they want with subscriptions with Disney Plus. And let's face it, that's driving Disney's entire ecosystem now. But I've told people that too. White men, in this case, the sexual orientation doesn't matter. White men are the most likely to pirate stuff. And that's why there's less content made for white men. Not any ideological framing. It's just a question of who's going to pay for shit.
And here's the thing. If you are boycotting something and you're just going to go watch it through pirating, that's not an actual boycott.
No, it's not. You have to not watch it.
Because here's the thing. Studios keep an eye on what's pirated.
Yeah.
I remember back in like 2015, 2016, I was working in a place where they played the radio and the news talked about, oh, here's like the 5 top pirated TV shows. Game of Thrones was right at the top.
Yeah.
And HBO was fine with that.
Because
for the most part,
relevance.
Because it kept it in the cultural zeitgeist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do they like it? No, but they are aware that it works. And so if you actually want to boycott something, you don't interact with it at all.
Right.